Hey, hey, welcome back to the show, the Ashley Avis podcast. Now, today I want to talk to somebody specific. I want to talk to new moms or parents or moms that have another one on the way. And for more than one reason, they want to get back to going to work. They want to get back to work, get back to working on their business, and some struggles are starting to come up. Maybe it's struggles with sleep, routines, feedings, finding childcare, mom guilt. These are all the things I'm going to be talking about today. And you're not just going to get my opinion. No, I have an expert on parenting. Okay. Her name is Katie, the mama coach. She's going to be my special guest today, and she gives all of her tips on how to handle heading back to work when you've got a little at home. A side note here, a lot of this really resonated with me, because and the conversation that we share and the stories that I share really are why I do what I do. If you go to my website and you click on my about page, you're going to see, or you could read my whole story of why I decided to start my own business. And it wasn't just because I wanted, I was an entrepreneur at heart, or because I was passionate about this thing, or I needed to make the money. It was mostly because I needed something for me that helped me, push that mental button in my brain that stimulated me, that gave me the challenge that wasn't parenting. Because parenting was coming natural to me. I had more than one child. I loved being mom, but I needed something else. And if you're feeling like you need something else too, or you want it, one, I do not want you to feel guilty about it whatsoever. And two, I want you to run with it and see where that takes you, because look where I am today. Listen to this episode, hear my stories, hear the expert advice from Katie, the mama coach, and then let me know what you think by sending me a message this week on Instagram. You can find me at Ashley Avis Co. All right, here's Katie. Welcome, Katie, to the podcast.
Thank you.
I haven't had anybody on the podcast that does what you do particularly. So I want to just open it up and give you the opportunity to share your story. Tell everybody what you do, Katie, and how you're changing the world.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. So my name is Katie, and I am the mama coach for the Niagara region. Myself, I have been a registered nurse for 17 years now, and primarily my background is labor and delivery and obstetrics. I'm also an IBCLC, which is International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, which is definitely a mouthful. And I'm a mom of two kids who are almost 8 and almost 12.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Mama Coach itself, we're actually a group of registered nurses all across North America with a goal of providing evidence-based support to new and existing parents, because we know it's a huge gap in the healthcare system in general is support for new parents and babies and all this sort of stuff. When I had my first kids, my husband and I were living in Calgary at the time, and my parents were, and both of our families were here in Ontario. So we had to do a lot of our stuff ourselves and figure things out ourselves. And we found a lot of gaps, that like we were having trouble with feeding and trouble with sleep and all these other things. And there was nothing like this out there. So at the time, the Mama Coach didn't exist. But it was something I was like, I kept thinking in my head is like, this needs to change. Like, something needs to get better, because like I was that exhausted parent with like ridiculously sore nipples, and I didn't know what to do or where to go because there was nothing out there. Right.
Yeah.
And then so 4 years ago, I joined the Mama Coach. And I was like, as soon as I came across it, I'm like, this is it. This was the thing that I was missing when my kids were little. And I'm so passionate about it because I want other parents to learn not only from my professional experience, but my parenting experience of like, don't do this, and like learn from my mistakes, basically. But just presenting that support in a just evidence-informed but non-judgmental manner, that it's like, I get it. It's hard. And a lot of what I do is helping, like I was saying, fill the gaps of the system, providing all the support. So what I do within the business is I provide support in pregnancy. I do prenatal classes. With that comes ongoing email support. I do newborn support. I do lactation and feeding. So, not like if you're formula feeding, breastfeeding, I support all that as well. I
Mhm.
do a big piece of what I do is sleep coaching for both like younger babies, and I can go up to the age of like 6 or 7. So if you're having trouble with your school age kid, I do helpful sleep support with that as well. I'm also a CPR instructor, so I talk a lot, about like food safety and introducing solids. So there's a lot of stuff that I do under the umbrella of the mama coach to just help support these parents when it's just like, well, Google's not giving me an answer and the books don't,
Ooh.
apply to me. And so what am I going to do? Right. And that's
Mhm.
where I can come in and really help.
I totally feel the need. I mean, I don't know about all of the parents out there or all the moms out there, but I am still firmly under belief that it takes a village to raise a child. And the way that we're living today, especially if anyone has had a child or a young child during the pandemic when we're in lockdown, you're on your own. Like it's like almost like it's society's expectation that you raise this child on your own. Whereas, I don't know, 100 or 200 years ago, everyone in the tribe helped you raise your child. And yeah, asking for help can be intimidating and hard. And when you open up that can of worms, like, can someone help me? In comes all of these moms or grandmas, even with all of their opinions and their two
Mhm.
cents, and it gets overwhelming and you don't know who to trust. So knowing that you're not just a mom yourself, you're also certified in all of these things
Mhm.
seems like it's definitely a need that moms or parents need in today's society. Am I right?
Yes, definitely. And even more so, it's like I've gotten in my business, I've gotten busier during the pandemic because
Yeah.
I was able to pivot virtually. So, still offering virtual lactation support, virtual prenatal classes, all these things, because again, with everything that happened, services just went away. And it's like, no, I'm still here and I will be part of that village, right?
Mhm.
I totally believe in that village, and it needs to be both personal and professional. It needs to be, you need people
Yeah.
from both ends to be part of your village.
Evidence informed and non judgmental because
Yep.
everyone's got their own parenting styles, right? So, today on the show, I really wanted to talk to the mom who has her own business or wants to go back to work and accelerate her career. And she's got this little baby or she's about to have this little baby and some of the struggles that she might be facing right now. And I don't want to like specifically pinpoint one to start, like one struggle. I want you to tell me what are those unforeseeable struggles or most common ones that you hear with new moms or maybe a mom who just has other older kids and has another one now but also wants to have a career.
Yeah, and it is a lot of struggling, obviously that when you're it's like, okay, you have kids, you're planning on kids, but what happens with the career, right?
Mhm.
And so the short answer, and we're going to get in a little more of this, is I say plan for three things if you're planning to go back to work after you've had your baby: feeding, childcare, and sleep.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
those are the obviously three big things. What is your plan for feeding your baby? What is your plan for childcare, which is probably the biggest one, and making sure that you're getting sleep. And those are usually the three big challenges that I help with clients when it comes to it's like, yeah, okay, it's like I'm heading back to work. What am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I heard you when you said sleep because you might think like, okay, I got my job, I've got my baby, but you have to prioritize yourself too. How are you actually going to function at work and feel like yourself if you are actually exhausted, if your child isn't giving you 7 hours of uninterrupted sleep? Can we start with that one?
yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. And so, I always say with people, it's like if what you're doing is still working, then continue doing it. So whatever that is, continue on. But if what's happening in your household, specifically with sleep, if it's not working for you, then you need to start looking at some changes because when I work with clients, I say it's not just sleep for your baby, it's sleep for the entire household. And
Mhm.
so while what you're doing right now may work right now because you can take a nap when your kid naps, but when you go back, you can't nap at your desk. Well, I don't think you should be able to. But so you need to kind of make a plan. It's like, yeah, like I need to be a functioning adult for 8 to 10 hours. And I can't do
Mhm.
that on 6 hours of broken sleep. So starting with some basics, when it comes to sleep is one, starting with a nice little simple, consistent bedtime routine that can help your baby get used to, what time it is, what time sleep is. Routines are really important. It's a big piece of what I do. And this including for like toddler ages too. If you've been out of the work force for a few years and you're going back, like toddlers love routines. So having a
Yeah.
nice, simple, consistent bedtime routine and a simple, consistent bedtime. I also suggest looking at, what time is your morning? What time are your naps? I have tons of free resources on my Instagram and my website talking about like awake time trackers and everything, just to make sure that your baby is getting enough sleep. And, because if a baby's overtired, it can cause night wakings, right?
Mm.
And then looking at, is your baby getting up at night? What are they doing? How are you responding? And then starting to kind of make some changes to help encouraging that consolidated sleep, not just again for your baby, but for yourself as well. And this is where sometimes professionals like myself can come in, because if you're like, well, I've read all the books and I've asked all the Facebook moms and I've tried all that stuff and it's not working, having a more individualized approach can come in and say, okay, well, let's make some changes. So then you can start getting that nice consolidated sleep for your baby that's going to bring you sleep as well. So then you're going to have that energy level to get through your workday when you go back to work.
Yes. And I like how you started that off with, if you have something that's working for you now, just keep doing it. Because I remember back when my son and then my daughter were tiny, and I felt like I was a nap time warrior. I wasn't napping when they were napping. That's when I would get all of my work done in that nap time, because I would go for a drive and put them in their car seat and put on relaxing music, and they would fall asleep in their car seat, and then I would just park back in my driveway, bring the car seat in the house, open the laptop, and get like that 1 to 1.5 hours of uninterrupted time to focus on my writing and on my work. And I don't know, I guess sometimes I felt guilty, like, oh, I should be holding them. Oh, I should have transferred them to your crib. But it worked. They loved being in that car seat, right?
Mhm.
Is that an example?
Yes,
I'm just
exactly.
having
Especially
flashbacks.
exactly, especially for entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
where you don't necessarily get that full 12 months off of maternity if you have to go back a little bit
Yeah.
earlier, or even if you take the maternity leave, but you work from home, you know, these rules, these suggestions and everything apply to that as well, right? Even if you are, especially because people are still working from home with COVID and everything anyway, you still have to plan for your work day and sleep and naps and feeding, because it's like you can't cram 8 hours of work into an hour and a half nap, right?
No.
So, I mean, as
I mean,
ambitious as you can be.
maybe I've done that once with a lot of coffee.
Yes.
But this, I think, so listening, we've got women who are either working and entrepreneurs or just working. So it's a good combination of both. And I say, let's lay out the expectation. Like, if you are working from home, entrepreneur or not, don't assume that that baby is also just going to be there and sweet and cute and you're going to be able to multitask all day long. Like, set some realistic expectations and also know that you're not going to be extremely well rested. What were those other things on your list again? Childcare and
Feeding,
feedings?
feeding.
Let's talk about those.
Yeah. So feeding is the other big one. We'll leave childcare for last because that's kind of like the beast when it comes to returning to work, I think. But this is more for thinking about that, especially if you are breastfeeding or pumping. What is going to be your plan for breastfeeding and pumping, your milk supply when you return to work? And this more is geared towards those who are working outside the home. Um,
Mhm.
and are you're separated from your baby. For those, instead of those who are working inside the home and you still have access to your baby, you can kind of continue on your breastfeeding pumping schedule. So the first thing to know, that if you're returning to work outside the home and your plan is to pump, that pumping and breastfeeding is a protected act under the Human Rights Commission. And so it's something that you are allowed to do in the workplace. And your employer can't say no to that. Um,
Hmm.
so the first thing you should do is, when you're planning on returning to work, is chat with your employer, depending on where you work and what your setup looks like, about a safe place to pump and express your milk. And it should not be a bathroom. I cannot stress that enough. That you should not, your employer should not tell you that you need to, that you're going to pump in the, the public restroom that the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
employees do. No, 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 no. And you can quote the Human Rights Commission if you want to for that. If you have an office that has a door that locks, fantastic. But you want to have your conversation with your employer, your manager, of saying, it's like, okay, I'm coming back to work in a couple months. I'm planning on continuing to pump. Where can I pump? What is that going to look like? And that's going to kind of look at what your space looks like.
Questions on that,
Yeah.
because I remember when I would pump my breast milk, it would take a very long time. How much of an amount of time do you have under what's your right? Because what if you go to work for 8 hours, but like 3 of them you're going to be pumping? You know what I mean?
Yes. So that is, again, a conversation typically with your employer. Sometimes,
Okay.
you want to make sure that, yeah, you're not spending 3 hours of your day pumping, because that's not fair to your employer as well. They have to accommodate, but to a certain point. But that's also why you want to make sure that you have a really good, effective pump. You
Ooh.
know, like, you want to make sure that you're gonna, like, this is the time to invest, if you can, in a really, like, top of the line double electric pump. So then you're going to be more efficient, right? Because ideally your pumping session should take max like 20-30 minutes, so you can easily kind of fit it into your workday. But you want to make sure that you're best utilizing that time, so then you're not going to get your employer kind of nattering that you're taking an hour to pump, right? So you
So
want
what's
to.
the best Sorry, so what's the best pump that you would recommend?
Oh, that kind of depends. I can't officially, like, endorse certain brands.
Okay.
But yeah, so definitely double electric pumps. There's Medela, there's Philips. If you want to go hands free, there's a pump called the Willow, which you literally just stick in your bra, and it's fantastic, but it is not cheap. So it really depends on what is your goal, right?
Okay.
Um, I know people who are going back to an office setting, they use a standard pump. I've worked with a couple of physicians who use the Willow, because then they can actually work and have and pump at the exact same time. So that kind of depends on what you're looking for. But it's part of the planning of, like, okay, what's going to happen, right?
Mhm.
And then planning ahead of time of just thinking, like, how often are you feeding your baby now, right? And so then how many times are you going to have to pump throughout the day? So typically you're able to hopefully breastfeed your baby before you go to work, and you have X many feeds throughout the day. Then you can kind of plan to say, okay, so I'm going to have 3 pumping sessions throughout my day, breastfeed when I get home, that sort of stuff. So you kind of want to get a little bit of a consistent schedule going. So
Mhm.
then you kind of know ahead of time about what time, how many times a day you need to pump. Because the problem sometimes when you go back to work and you pump is you're going to get a dip in supply. And this is very common when you are pumping or just away from your baby. You have the separation of the mom hormones and all this sort of stuff. So sometimes you get a bit of a dip in supply. But if you're supposed to be pumping 3 times during your 8-hour day and you only get to pump two, eventually your supply will downregulate.
Mhm.
So something to kind of plan for in the back of your head, that you might get a dip in supply as you return to work. And thinking about what can you do in case that happens, keeping your supply up, lots of that sort of stuff. So
Okay. Now, I was going to save this question for later when we talked about childcare, but I want to bring it up right now because I'm already feeling it. What about that mom who says, okay, I'm going to go to work. I have this separation from my baby now. My milk supply is going down. Whoosh, they start to feel the mom guilt.
mhm.
I'd love to know your approach on mom guilt or your take on it, especially when the babies are so young?
Yeah. Um, Mom guilt is sadly, it's common. It's way too common. I think like I've experienced it. I know you've probably experienced it. I don't really think
Mhm.
there's any mom who has not felt or will not feel mom guilt at some point.
Wait,
And
how do you define mom guilt?
I define mom guilt as basically feeling, that I'm doing this, but I should be with my baby,
Mhm.
right? I'm doing this, but I should be breastfeeding. I'm pumping, but I should be breastfeeding. I'm at work and enjoying my work, but I should be at home being a stay-at-home mom. There's different levels, and I think it just depends on your situation, but it's that we're not following that societal expectation of we should be at home in the kitchen with our babies and all this sort of stuff and not having a
Mhm.
career outside the home. And, we're doing that because lots of people go back to work because not because they have to, because they love their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And now you have to feel it's like, now I got to pick, right? And it's hard, right? To kind of say, it's like, well, I want to be at home, but I also want to be at work, right? And that's
Right?
where that guilt really, really comes in.
Because I
So,
think we're told like once we have this child, our identity is going to shift to a mom, and that should fulfill you 100%. But like watching Coco Melon and holding a napping child and watching the same shows over and over again, or reading the same stories, or making the same baby food on repeat, isn't always pushing that mental button that we need to push. So then you end up saying, okay, well, maybe I'll try and go back to work part time or full time. And you have those conversations in your head and you start to feel guilty about it. That's
mhm,
that's the first thing I felt. But
mhm.
and a lot of what how my story and how my business formed was based on the fact that I needed something else besides being a mom. And I think that's okay to say. I'm sorry, these days, like, don't expect to be 100% fulfilled by your baby. It doesn't mean you don't 100% love them. It's just you might need something else to keep you going.
You
Common thought?
100, yeah. You
Mhm.
just hit that right nail on the head, that like it's okay if motherhood is not 100% fulfilling, and it's okay to search out something else. You're still, when you have a child, you're still you. You're just you with a small human now, right? You know,
Really hard. You could say that again. That's really hard to actually believe
yeah,
once you have a newborn that needs you 24/7. That
yes,
I'm still me. It's like
yes,
you lose yourself, especially
yes.
the first time.
I know, and it's a lot. I think of what happens in that first 3 to 4 months of motherhood is that because your babies need you so much, you just kind of feel like you lose yourself because you're just so engrossed into this tiny human that needs you 24 hours a day. And then the child needs you a little bit less as they get a little bit older. And you're like, oh, yeah, where do I fit in? Where's me, the pre baby you? Right. And so you haven't lost yourself just because you've had a child. It's trying to find that balance between pre-parenting you and now parenting you, and whatever that looks like, with like working, not working, out of the home, in the home, doesn't matter. It's just trying to
Yeah.
find that balance of both worlds, right? You haven't lost yourself just because you've had a child.
Mm. Ooh, we all need to hear that. That should be on your t-shirt.
Yeah.
You haven't lost yourself just because you've had a child. Can
Yes.
I tell a funny story? It was my son was little and he used to get when he'd get fussy or hungry, right? The only thing that would soothe him in my mind was to feed him, right? And I was the only one that could feed him because I was breastfeeding. So he must have been under 4 months because I only breastfed him for 4.5 months. And I remember I had a night where I'm going to go out and get a pedicure. And I told my husband to text me if he starts fussing and he can't calm him down. That's when he's going to need me. So I go and I'm sitting there. I'm like, come on, world's fastest pedicure, please. I need to get home, my baby. I need to get home. He's going to cry. I need to get home. The whole time I'm just like riddled with this mom guilt, not enjoying the experience. Finally, it's done. But I start getting those text messages and they're sitting there saying, okay, just let them dry, let them dry. Otherwise, like if you put your shoes on, they're going to get smudged. And it was winter. Okay. So this is me sitting there, moment of truth. My baby's at home crying. He's probably choking on his spit. He's probably beet red. I am sweating. He's probably sweating. My husband's texting me nonstop. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Back in the day, I should have been like, call Katie. But what I did was I said, you know what? My baby needs me. I can't believe I came here. I put my shoes on. I paid. I got home. I took my shoes off and they were all smudged. And I've told that story before. I forget. I think I told it to like a yoga class or something. And all the moms are like, oh, I've been there. I've been there. Right. And it's tough because then you cry because you're like, it was all a waste of time. I
Mhm.
can't believe I went. I don't deserve to have pedicures anymore. But it's like you got to find the balance. You know,
Mhm.
Ashley, before having a baby, loved getting her toes done. Ashley, right now, does too. Just saying.
Yep.
Don't know if
And
anyone listening now can relate, but that's my
and
story.
your baby was okay. That's the thing, is that when
Yeah.
you leave, like, because I felt guilty. My husband would come home, like because again, we lived, in Calgary. My husband would come home from work and
Hmm.
we had an agreement because I've been home all day with this, colicky child. I was like, I need 15 to 30 minutes by myself. Right. That was and I'm like, I would go have a shower. I would go do something. And even if it's like, I would just go take the dog for a walk. Right. I felt guilty leaving my, typically angry child because my husband has useless nipples, to go walk my dog. And but it was just like, but I was like, I needed it,
Hmm.
and I needed to get out and just like something for you. But when I came home, he was fine. Sure, my kid was a little bit mad at me. He'd cry, we cuddle, I'd feed him, he's fine. But like,
Hmm.
he's a perfectly well-adjusted 12-year-old. Like he's fine, and that's the thing is like, again, ties into the mom guilt where we just had, and again, this gets into like the hormones and all that, like motherhood drive of like we must respond to our crying babies and we're trying to turn that off, but it's like they can cry and they're okay. Like you're not going
Yeah.
to wreck them if they cry for a bit, right?
Or if they cry with their dad,
Yeah,
it's their turn, you
yeah.
know?
They're cared for, they're fine, it's all
Mhm.
good. Kids can cry.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, when I by the time I had gotten back home, he had cried himself to sleep and he was in my husband's arms. So then I was crying because my toes were ruined and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. It's hard.
Hmm.
It's hard. So let's go back then. So not to traumatize anyone and think
Hmm.
motherhood is just going to be a bunch of crying because it's not. There's
No.
also all the other positive things. But the third struggle we wanted to address was childcare. And we don't have to talk too much about this one, but give me all your tips and why is that a whole other thing to worry
So
about?
it's the it's a whole other thing because I think it is kind of like the biggest piece of the mom guilt when a person is going back to work, again, whether it's inside the home or outside the home, of the I need to find somebody else to care for my child. And
Hmm.
it's hard to find someone that you're going to trust with this small human that you gestated and cared for 6 months, a year, whatever your timeline is, to hand it off to somebody else, right? So it's a very difficult process sometimes to find childcare. And this very much finding the right childcare depends on what your situation is. You're working inside the home, outside of home, 8-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts, things like that. There's definitely lots of options. There's daycare centers, there's private day homes, there's agency day homes. You can get friends and family to look after your kids. If you have a fellow entrepreneur who's working at home and has little ones the same age, you guys can do like daycare swaps where,
Oh,
like one of you looks after both kids for a couple of days a week and then you guys switch. So then you get dedicated days. And this is the thing where I think a lot of entrepreneurs and people who are working from home don't totally think it's like, well, I'm working from home. I don't need childcare.
oof.
It's like, but you're going to have a 12-month-old, who is literally into everything because they can probably walk now or are close to it. And you're trying to get your work done and have meetings and all this sort of stuff. Like we've all seen the funny, hilarious Zoom calls now lately of people trying to have fancy business meetings and, their kids are running around and all this kind of stuff. It's like, that's what happens when you don't have childcare and you're trying to work at home. So whether it's somebody comes in, you got to hire a sitter for a couple hours a day, whatever kind of works. But I'd say it's one of the bigger ones because one, it's a process to find childcare. To find someone who is going to meet your needs, meet your hours, meet your cost, because it's not cheap having kids in childcare, And then that level of trust. And this is where I heavily rely on the mom gut. You know, when we were looking for
I just
childcare,
wrote that down.
yes,
Trust your gut.
trust your gut. Because
100%.
yeah, we, because my son had a couple daycare providers when we lived in Calgary. We've been through a couple daycare providers since we moved back to Ontario. And there's a few of them where it's just like, you just, because you have to do an interviews. You 100% have to interview, see the space. And just like, there was a few where just like, spidey sense, no, thank you. Like, and like,
Mhm.
how good they look on paper. If you're not getting that vibe, it's okay to say no, right? And you're looking for daycares that, again, meet your hours, meet your needs, meet your costs. And you want to talk about, like, are they going to kind of, what sort of information you're going to get them from them? Are they going to put your baby to sleep on your nap schedule or their nap schedule? What's their feeding like? Can you come and breastfeed in the middle of the day, right? If you have a job that allows you to do that. Like having those conversations, finding that, I call it the lesser evil, because you're never going to be perfectly happy with anybody looking after your child. I mean, like, I wish I could split myself in two, one person to look after my kids and one person to go work. And so there's never, and I don't know, unless you end up with Mary Poppins or something, like, you're never going to be perfectly happy. So
Mhm.
finding that best option that works for you, and then doing trial days, right? And again, this is also why you need to start this process early. So if you're going back to work on a certain date, 2 weeks or a month in advance, then, whether, again, if it's like home, in your home, babysitter in a childcare center, start off with taking your kid a couple hours a day, staying there, increasing the time, just to kind of get them used to it, especially if they've been home for an extended period. you know Talking about like the older babies, and now you're finally going
Mhm.
back to work outside the home, especially if, COVID babies, you've been working from home and now you're going outside the home. Taking a little bit of time, doing trial days, building it up, and all of a sudden just dropping your baby into a full day daycare. Like, they'll adjust, they'll be fine. It's usually harder on the parents than it is on the kids. But just then, but doing a little bit of a transition process can make that adjustment easier, not only for them, but for you as well. So that's, it's one of the things you want to start planning for earlier in the end of your maternity leave process. So then you know what your options are going to be and you feel comfortable with that decision.
I like that answer a lot. It will take a lot of extra planning, but you're going to feel so much better about the whole transition and that first drop off where you have a full day of work,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can remember when my son was born, sometimes I would drop him off at the childcare in the gym at the time just so I could have my hour and a half. So it doesn't have to even be, it could be something that you start even when they're tiny, just to get an hour or two alone where you get comfortable as mom or parent, with somebody else watching your child.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I did that. And then I started my son off at just a morning Montessori school. And then the next year it was like just a part time day. And then the next year was junior kindergarten, which
Yeah.
you kind of got to celebrate a little bit when they finally make it into school. Because my daughter, I think it was so much easier to drop off my daughter then, because I knew that, and this kind of speaks back to mom guilt. I probably got to put that in the title of this episode, but how dropping them off, especially the first couple times, you feel guilty because a part of you is excited that you get to go to work now, but someone else is going to be watching them. But it's good for them to be exposed to other people too, and it's good for them to see that you're working, and it's good for them because you're going to fill your cup up, and when you're done with work and you just want to snuggle your kid, you are going to snuggle and play so much better
Mm-hmm.
after that work day if you loved what you did for work,
Yes.
like I have a very little guilt over this past year, dropping my daughter off to Montessori school, my son off to kindergarten, which we're so lucky that we have schools open now,
Mm-hmm.
because I have no guilt anymore because I'm going to be such a better mom when I pick them up,
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah.
opposed to like the tired, exhausted, I don't want to play Barbie anymore, mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that idea of like starting early, going back to the gym, like whatever little activity, it just, because it's great socialization for them too. But then when it comes to that full day daycare transition, they'll adjust a lot better if they've been exposed to other kids in that daycare kind of setting. And yes,
Mhm.
and it's just, and again, circling back to that mom guilt, a lot of it is like, he's like, oh, well, I'm not at home with your kid all day. That it becomes more quality versus quantity. It's like, yeah, you're spending less time with your kid because you're at work, but you're completely right. Your cup is filled, your emotional cup, your spiritual cup, whatever that is, because
Mhm.
you're like, okay, I go off, I feel good, I've been productive, and then you get that quality time with your kiddo at the end of the day. Like,
Yeah,
I come home from work, we make dinner, I talk about their day, we do bedtime. Again, like it's only a few hours, but it's that quality time that the kids kind of get. So you just got to make the most of it when you get home at the end of the day, right?
totally. Totally. And I just see it also too as like one day I want them to feel like they're stuck at home with their kids? No, I want my kids to go out and live a fun, exciting life. So they have to see us doing it too. If we want our kids to be happy, we need to show them how to be happy and energized and passionate and inspired every day. And I'm a fan. If you want to be a stay at home mom, especially in those early years, I'm a fan. If you need to go back to work or you want to, I'm a fan too. I think it takes a tribe or village, takes a village, right, to raise those kids. It doesn't have to just always be on you. And coming
No.
out of a pandemic, I'm really happy that there's people like you out there for people that are isolated at home so they can still like virtually or over the phone get some support and get some answers to questions from someone that is not judgmental and actually like educated about these
Mhm.
things. Yeah. So for everyone that wants to connect with you and find out more about your services or get those free guides that you have, where can they find you?
So the easiest way to get a hold of me or to find a lot of the free resources I have is on Instagram. So it's at Katie the Mama Coach. I also have the website, so it's themamacoach.com. Katie Roebuck, which is my last name. And that's usually the easiest way to get a hold of me. Shoot me a message if you have questions. If you want to talk about more, I want to know more about what I do. I have free consultations, tons of free resources for sleep and feeding and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'm super passionate about this, what I do, because again, I'm a working mom. I know it can be really, really hard. And
Mhm.
I love providing that support and education for new parents.
Thank you. I'll link all of that in the show notes, which are available at ashley.avismarketing.com/podcast. Thank you so much, Katie, for being on the show. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I think that's it. I know we covered a lot, and thank you so much for having me.
That was a great conversation with Katie. I'm going to be linking all of her details about how you can connect with her and get her free resources in the show notes, which are available at ashley.avismarketing.com/podcast. Then if you have any conversation, you want to have a conversation with me or just share your opinion about what we talked about today or any of your tips or advice or inspiration, please send me a message on Instagram at Ashley Avis Co. is where you can find me. If you're listening right now and you liked what you heard today, please feel free to tell a friend about my show. I absolutely think like when you tell a friend and if you think it'll help them, people will go and listen. And the more people that listen to my show, the more lit up and inspired I am to go out and find really great guests like today or to write out the best tips and information that I can share with you on the show. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Until next Tuesday, you got this.